One of the reasons why I decided to go out on my own, in addition to the, selfish ego reasons, it was also because I wanted to be able to have really deep relationships with my clients, where when you work in a firm, you have to carry a certain amount of cases. You are taking the cases, in a lot of respects, you're told to take, or if you're rejecting a case, you have to, give a reason why. I wanted to be able to choose my own clients and have real relationships with them. And so as I was starting out, I got to do that, and I got to choose to work with people who I really enjoyed. Obviously, you're meeting people at a terrible circumstance in their life, but if you can form that bond with them, I think that's a help to your clients. And so I really enjoyed that piece of it. But as my firm grew, I started to feel myself get a little bit removed from that. And I was spending a little bit less time with my clients and taking more cases. And I really wanted to get back to that point in time where it was me and the client knew that we were going to work together and I was going to get the job done for them.
Howdy, and welcome to the show. Cooper's Code focuses on legal issues and notable practitioners, distilling wisdom so we all achieve the best results for our clients. I'm Miles Cooper, and I'm excited to share part 2 of this conversation with Shaana Rahman. When we last left on the chronologic basis, you are still a defense lawyer for the first 4 or 5 years. What prompted the shift?
Well, there were a couple things. The guys I work for, they were soft-hearted liberals, and they would take a lot of plaintiff cases. So if the insurance adjuster's cousin's niece had a car accident, they would send it to our firm, even though we didn't do that. And the partners would farm out those cases, and eventually they would farm them out to me. And so I enjoyed that work. I enjoyed the other side of the V. So I did those cases, and over the years, I had a lot of responsibility there. I had a lot of cases. I was running probably, 40 or 50 defense cases, litigation. And I got really good at defense work, really good at it. And, as a young lawyer, you want to succeed. You want to excel at the job that you are doing. And so one day I had a arbitration as a defense lawyer, and the plaintiffs were a young woman and her mother who was blind, and the mother's guide dog. And my client had, rear-ended them or, some sort of motor vehicle collision thing. And I won. I defensed the arbitration, and they got 0. And when I drove back to the office, I was thinking to myself, yeah, I won. And then I thought about this really nice young woman and her really sweet mother and the dog and what my client had done. And I didn't feel good. And that was the feeling that started gnawing at me, that the better I got at the work, the less good I felt about myself.
How did you act on that?
I started looking for jobs. And I think in the back of my mind, I had known, even though I had that one interview with that one plaintiff's firm years ago, and that, I didn't get that job, that was the work I wanted to do. And that goes back to the longshoreman clients I had and wanting to represent people, because representing defendants, although you're representing people, right, it was very different. The relationships were very complicated, because when I found that when people are accused of hurting other people, there are a lot of defense mechanisms that are immediately employed, just the very fact of the human condition. And so there was not a lot of honesty on that side. And so it was hard to form connections with your clients, right? And some of my clients, I did some sexual assault cases on the defense, and that also was very hard, right? So I started looking for jobs in the same way. I answered a blind ad. I thought the description of this law firm in San Francisco, I thought for sure it was the firm that I had wanted to work at, the white shoe preeminent plaintiffs law firm in town. And I was so excited. I was like, I'm going to apply. I'm going to get my dream job. Great. I get the call to invite me for the interview. It is not the preeminent white shoe plaintiffs firm in town.
At this time, is there only one of those?
Correct.
Okay.
It is another firm that I had cases against and had a little bit of a reputation. And I was less excited, but I went for the interview anyway, which happened to be, because San Francisco is a very small place, it happened to be directly across the street from my current office.
Okay.
On Pine Street. And so I went for an interview and I got the job.
How long were you at that firm?
I think 5 years.
As you switched into that role, can you describe what it was like to now be, and I apologize to my defense brethren for this kind of an analogy, but pushing cases forward as opposed to trying to stop forward momentum and poke holes? That seems to be kind of the macro difference in certain respects.
I think that's the difference now. When I was a defense attorney, it was a different scenario. We were not panel counsel. There were still a lot of not captive small defense firms. And to keep our clients, which were the carriers, we had to move cases forward. And so that was my training, was to keep the momentum, to get cases settled or tried or moved. I think that has changed a lot over the last decade or so.
There's still some wonderful firms who, when you see them on the other side, your response is, oh, this is going to be hard. But they also recognize value. But yeah, there does seem to be kind of a two-tier in terms of how people handle the defense side now.
Right. And just to that point, I mean, there's nothing that makes me happier than to figure out on the other side of my case is going to be, an excellent defense attorney and an excellent defense firm. That to me is, it's 100% better than anything else, right? Although your opponent is good and fierce and will defend vigorously, you get a certain level of professionalism and folks who understand what we're doing. And even though you're on opposite sides of the problem, oftentimes it really is, you're able to effectuate a solution because you have that level of professionalism. To go back to the transition.
Yes.
The transition was not that difficult for me. It was kind of the same thing. I walked in, I got handed a bunch of cases from a lawyer who I guess had stopped working without anybody's knowledge. And, it was tough. It was a very rough and tumble kind of bootstraps kind of a firm, but it was exciting and fast paced. And it was just like, get in there and figure out what you have and go out into the world.
What kind of authority were you given in that environment?
It's interesting because I just assumed I had the same level of authority as I did at my defense firm, that I would, I had cases. So my responsibility was to review them, work them up, and then see if they could be resolved, right? So my first week, I did what I saw my calendar. I saw I had a settlement conference. So I went to the settlement conference with the client and settled the case. And I came back and the whole office was buzzing. And I walked back in and the other lawyer's like, where have you been? I was at a settlement conference. Did you tell the boss? No, I didn't think he'd want to be bothered with that level of detail from some small case. And apparently no one went to settlement conferences or mediations or depositions or anything by themselves in that firm. But no one had told me. And so I thought, oh, well, I guess I overstepped. And the other lawyers were very concerned and very worried. And then the boss comes in and he's like, I heard you went to a settlement conference. I said, yeah. What happened? I told him. What'd you get? Told him. He's like, all right. And then from that point on, I ran my cases.
You earned the authority.
I took it. I don't know. I don't know how it all works. I've never been good with being told what to do, but I have always been a good worker. So that's kind of what I applied.
As you worked at this firm, then, did you end up kind of on that same path, working your cases by yourself for the most part?
I did. My boss in that firm was also a good mentor.
Are we using names here?
Well, it's your show, Miles.
I think when people are saying things that are positive, like being a good mentor, running a good firm, getting good opportunities, definitely. Let's use names. So who was it that you were with?
Chris Dolan.
I can see why that would be good training.
Chris and I got along from the get-go. He was an excellent mentor for me. He's still a dear, dear friend. I learned, and this was back in the day when he was, the community still thought of him as somewhat of a scrappy upstart, right? And he was young, and he had a lot of energy, a lot of cases, a lot of folks around. And we were all really committed to this cause that he had brought us around to. It was kind of we were a little bit a band of misfits, I think. And I think we all wore that with a badge of honor.
Cult-like?
Family-like.
I ask only because I had that crucible-like environment at Veeam, and it was fantastic. There's
an adrenaline to plaintiffs' work. And when you're doing it with other people, you feed off each other, and you're all really focused on this one thing, which is to do the best job you can for your client. And when you all have that focus and you're led by someone who that's all there is, there's just an energy to it. And so when we were in that, little rundown behind street office, all running around scrapping, it was a pretty amazing experience, and Chris was at that time, this is when you'd be copying paper, like reams of paper to put together a motion, right? And it's 10 o'clock at night and he's on the floor with the stapler, right? And you don't see that much these days. I mean, obviously we don't staple things and whatnot.
PDFs take fewer staples.
There was a lot of camaraderie amongst us and we had a lot of laughs. There were tears, there was yelling, there was all the kinds of things. It was oftentimes like a dysfunctional Thanksgiving holiday with your family, but with the good and bad with that.
Did you get an opportunity to try cases with Chris?
I did. I tried early on when I first got there. We tried a case, a small case, a pedestrian case, and it was my first opportunity to really spend time with him one-on-one and get to know him. So that was a really good opportunity. It's kind of an interesting case.
Anything you want to unpack?
I just remember being really concerned because our expert was a chiropractor who also was an accident reconstructionist. But, from my defense background, you had your experts and they had pedigrees and they were vetted and all this. And so here was this kind of different kind of world where, you have a small case that needs a little something and plaintiffs, there was an expert who was cultivated for this, but it was outside of what I was comfortable with. And I remember Chris saying to me, go meet with the expert. And so I go to some strip mall in Concord at 10 o'clock at night by myself. All these things seem reasonable back then. I meet with a stranger and he's taking me through his exhibit. And I was like, all right, let's see it. And he pulls out a piece of poster board that has a rendering of the intersection in magic marker. And the pedestrian is depicted with a stick figure with a frowny face, head. And then I was like, okay, I'll bite. How are you going to show the car movement? And he pulls out a Matchbox car. Is that what it's called?
That is what they're called.
Yeah. And that was the exhibit. So now I'm on BART by myself.
With the poster board?
No, I leave that with him because he had to fine tune it. So I was like, okay. I call Chris on the phone and I'm not making any sense. Like I'm stammering. And he's like, what's wrong? Calm down. And I hear myself just saying, the exhibit, frowny face, magic marker. And finally he gets it out of me and I tell him, he's like, oh, it's going to be fine. And it was fine. But, you asked about the differences that's the difference, right? At that time.
It's interesting that you bring that kind of a piece up because as we've all had the opportunity to use more gee whiz graphics, amazing animations to the point that you can't tell that it's not real life footage. Some of the things like a storyboard or butcher block paper and things written down in the moment have almost more impact.
There's a tangible effect to those things, right? They don't look slick. They're easy to understand. So there was sort of a magic to it that I was afraid of. I was afraid if it wasn't polished and professional, it wouldn't meet the standard or it wasn't good enough. And, Chris has always been very big picture and good with that sort of thing, right? Understanding that a jury just wants to drill down, just show me what happened. And sometimes those graphics are useful and needed. And, the way people take in information now versus 20 years ago is very different too. But there are times when, and this was the lesson I learned from that, keeping something simple is sometimes the best thing you can do, right? A story, sometimes we overcomplicate stories. We overcomplicate them with diagrams and facts and numbers and dates. And that's not always for the best.
When you try cases now, are there steps that you take to uncomplicate the story?
I go back to telling the story to people who aren't lawyers. And I try to drill down the story into a 3-minute nugget. And if I can't tell my client's story in 3 minutes, then I'm not doing a good job.
How do you practice that?
I try to do it in a not practice format, if that makes sense. I will have a lot of conversations and I will just talk, I won't talk directly about a case, obviously, but I'll talk to folks I know who are not lawyers and kind of in like a casual conversation.
Somebody that you're next to in the checkout counter?
Maybe not that casual.
I raised that one because one of the other lawyers I know who I saw do this was Cynthia McGuinn, where any person who you had a reasonable enough opportunity to chat with, it took me a while to figure out what she was doing. Like, oh, well, you're practicing.
But that's also a tip I've given a lot of lawyers over the years is how to practice telling a story is to, go have coffee with your friend who, is a teacher or something else, not in the law, and take a vignette from your day. You went and bought a coffee at the coffee shop and turn that into a story, with a narrative arc and conflict and resolution. And if you do that, that's a good practice tool for telling a client's story.
At a certain point, did you decide that it was time to go out on your own? How did you go about doing that?
Well, there were a lot of steps to it. There was the sort of mentally being ready. There was kind of sketching out what that would look like, what I wanted, and also why. As you work in firms, you learn that there are good sides and there are ups and downs to working for someone else. And I remember one of my bosses years ago had told me when you're a boss, you have worker bees and you have stars. And the worker bees, you need those. right? They do the everyday churn out the work. That's what they do. They're steady, they're reliable, they're not flashy, they're not the top of their field, but you need them. And then you have your stars, right? And a firm needs both of those components to succeed. And so I had to figure out, am I just a worker bee or am I a star? Whatever that meant. That was my kind of calculus. And for me, I was always, every job I had, even before, law, I would do the job and think, if this was my thing, here's how I would do it. So there are all those pieces to that. Are you really the kind of person who can have your own business? And as a lawyer, you can be a lawyer, not attached to a firm, but can you run a business? And that was the trickier part of it. But there was a huge piece of ego involved in that for me too, because I did work for a firm where, Chris was a very well-respected lawyer by that point, and he got good cases, he got good results, and a lot of the success I had and in that firm was in part based on his name, I felt. And there was always that thing in the back of my mind, even when I handled a case from start to finish, did I get an edge in this case because I'm talented or because, I have that star power behind me? So for me, I needed to know, can I do this on my own? I don't want to make my reputation on the back of anybody else's success. And I need to do this for myself.
As far as talking with Chris about this, at what point in that arc did you decide it was time to have that conversation?
We had it early on. I wanted to talk to him about it and, make a plan with him. And we did. And it was emotional because we were close. And I didn't necessarily I wasn't leaving him, but I needed to do this thing for myself and for my career. And I needed to test myself. And he understood that, having done that himself.
How did you handle cases?
We just talked about it. And I said, here are the ones that I think I should take with me because they're far along. What do you think? And we agreed on a thing, and that's what we did. Obviously up to the clients, but
right.
That's what happened.
You are now out on your own. You're running your own firm. Did you start with people right away? Was it just you? How did you get it going?
I had a partner, a friend at Chris's who had left, and we decided to go out together. He did family law at the time. And so it was just the two of us, and we got some offices in the Flood building. And, we had a little tiny office, and then we hired an assistant and, went from there.
Did you feel like Sam Spade every time you went into work?
A little bit like that. Not exactly. We did have walkie-talkies at the beginning so we can talk because the offices are adjoining, but, weird.
Kind of like moonlighting, if people remember that, right?
Very much like that.
Really, walkie-talkies?
Mm-hmm. We did.
As that firm evolved, did you end up expanding it? How did you kind of figure out what's right size for you?
It grew as the cases grew. We outgrew that space. We got a bigger space. Then there were more people. Then there were assistants and law clerks and young lawyers, and it grew.
As far as your firm now, how many people do you have with you at this point?
It's just me and a paralegal.
And part of the reason I'm bringing that forward at this stage is it seems that different people find different levels of happiness in terms of how they structure their firm, in terms of larger, smaller. And you are one of the lawyers who has successfully managed right-sizing their firm without it being a constant growth mindset. And meaning growth is not always good. Can you articulate for those who are thinking about running a firm or questioning what they're doing in the current moment with their firm, how you arrived at where you are now and why?
That's an interesting question. So for a lot of years, eventually my partnership ended early on, and then it was just me. And I put together for many years really good people, and I had a lot of fun with it. So I was always mentoring a couple of law clerks, young lawyers, assistants who would get mentored to go to law school. I had a young team always, and there was some turnover there, but I had recreated sort of that camaraderie that I so enjoyed. And I felt like I was teaching, and it was a good place for me. It was hard because I was running a lot of cases. We've talked about this over the years. I used to run, 50, 60 cases with a team, and that was a lot.
All litigation, any pre-lit when you're running that number?
It was a combination, but it was a very busy practice. And I kept that model for a long time. And then I had a lot of changes happen in my personal life. And it just seemed to me that it was not a tenable solution for my future.
Tenable in terms of the amount of energy, in terms of on the mentoring and development side?
I think a lot of things, because one of the reasons why I decided to go out on my own, in addition to the, selfish ego reasons, it was also because I wanted to be able to have really deep relationships with my clients, where when you work in a firm, you have to carry a certain amount of cases. You are taking the cases in a lot of respects you're told to take, or if you're rejecting a case, you have to, give a reason why. I wanted to be able to choose my own clients and have real relationships with them. And so as I was starting out, I got to do that, and I got to choose to work with people who I really enjoyed. Obviously, you're meeting people at a terrible circumstance in their life, but if you can form that bond with them, I think that's a help to your clients. And so I really enjoyed that piece of it. But as my firm grew, I started to feel myself get a little bit removed from that. And I was spending a little bit less time with my clients and taking more cases. And I really wanted to get back to that point in time where it was me and the client knew that we were going to work together and I was going to get the job done for them. So I had started to think about decreasing the types of cases that I take, and taking less cases and moving to a more boutique law firm model. That was pre-COVID. And so I had started that process, and then COVID hit. And at that time, just by happenstance, I had paralegal had moved to a different left to go somewhere else, and a young lawyer had same thing. And I was down a couple of employees, and I was in that process of starting to hire. COVID shut down, and it gave me a lot of time to reflect. What does this look like now? I was panicked because I didn't have this cadre of team around me. And I was like, can I do this? What's going to happen? And I let it play out, because even though, that was a tough time for everybody, it did give me the benefit of some moments of quiet reflection to see what my firm could look like.
As you talk about relationships with clients, when I think of you, I think of excellence across the board, and also being known for certain types of cases as well. And one of those are your roots within the cycling community. Can you talk a little bit about how you developed those roots and how you came to have those kinds of relationships in the cycling community? In essence, I want you to give away your marketing secrets.
I have no secrets at all. I formed a relationship with the San Francisco Bike Coalition early on when I first opened my practice. I really, as a longtime San Francisco resident, I was really interested in the work they were doing. I think as lawyers, we are always looking at the world we live in terms of, safety and what's dangerous and how do we make the environment we live in better. just to be in, to enjoy. And so I was really taken even at that time with the work they were doing in terms of advocacy, not just, for bikers' rights or safety, but the really intricate conversations they were having with with the city and county of San Francisco to create infrastructure change. And I felt that work was really important. And, back then, you remember what it was like to ride in San Francisco. It was, terrifying. So I wanted to throw my support to the extent I could to the Bike Coalition. And so that's kind of how I got my start.
Is that the focus on the world around you and the dangerous conditions, so to speak, not to use a legal buzzword, but legal buzzword, is that what led to your expertise on the more city side of things? Because that's of the two areas that I think you are most known for, it's cycling work and taking on municipalities for a variety of things.
Right. I don't know if I would go as far as to say expertise, but I certainly do a lot of those. I have done a lot of those dangerous condition cases against public entities over the years. And I think that's, it's sort of a niche practice that you find yourself in because you take one case and then someone comes and says, oh, you just had that case, I have this case. And what I have found over the years is there are a lot of lawyers who won't take those cases because they're expensive, they're complex, they're incredibly difficult. So I started to get a lot of calls on those cases.
Any 30,000-foot view feedback that you would give to somebody who was considering taking that kind of a case on?
Well, just with any type of case you take on where you're not familiar with the law, you really have to be educated. The legal parameters to sue a public entity can be complex, and there are a lot of pitfalls for those who are uninitiated. And I think it's not dissimilar to doing medical malpractice, right? I find it's a small community in that way. And if you are not familiar with these cases, they can be challenging. And there are real risks for your client that you might not have in a regular personal injury case. And so, ask questions, find someone to bounce ideas off.
And are you that kind of a person? If somebody has a case, a dangerous conditions case, would you be open to somebody reaching out?
I do that all the time.
Join us next week for part 3 with Shaana Rahman. Please email us at podcast@coopers.law with questions, comments, feedback, and suggestions for who we should have on the show. Like what you heard? Share us with a colleague and leave us a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. To all of you doing justice out there, happy hunting.